All right, buckle up, everyone, for a deep dive today into canine degenerative myelopathy. DM for short. You guys wanted to get technical, so we're diving deep into a recent research article. It's all about DM in Italian dog populations.
Oh, yeah, we're going full on veterinary genetics today. Get ready to decode some DNA. Love it.
So for anyone who needs a quick refresher, DM is a neurodegenerative disease, affects the spinal cord, that leads to progressive paralysis.
Yeah, it's often compared to ALS in humans. Sadly, like ALS, no cure for DM yet either.
Right, and we typically see it in older dogs. Symptoms usually starting around 8 years old.
It's a late-onset disease. Breaks your heart to see it. But this research is actually looking at the prevalence of specific genetic mutations, the ones associated with DM, and in a whole bunch of different dog breeds in Italy.
And they really went all out with the data collection for this one.
Yeah.
Over 1,600 dogs from 84 different breeds. They really wanted to paint a detailed picture.
It's a big study. A really comprehensive look at DM in Italian dogs. Gives us lots to talk about today.
Before we get lost in the data, though, can you give us a quick overview of the study? How'd they do it? What were they looking for?
Sure thing. So this was a retrospective observational study. Means they used existing data collected between 2014 and 2023.
Okay, so like looking back in time to see what they could find.
Exactly, like a genetic time machine. And all this data came from a commercial lab in Italy. It's called Vetogene.
And what were these genetic detectives searching for?
They were zeroing in on two specific genetic mutations. The first one is called C.11HGA. That one's found in a lot of different breeds. The second is C.52AT. And that one's pretty much only seen in Bernese Mountain Dogs.
So like a genetic fingerprint for DM.
Yeah, you could say that. And what they found is going to be super interesting for a lot of dog lovers out there, especially if you're a fan of certain breeds.
All right, you've got me hooked. What did they uncover?
Well, buckle up because this is a big one. The overall prevalence of that first mutation, the C.11HGA, was high, way higher than they expected. Over 25% of the dogs tested turned out to be carriers.
Wait, so 1 in 4 dogs walking around with this mutation? That seems like a lot.
It is a lot. And almost 9% were homozygous, meaning they had 2 copies of the mutation, putting them at higher risk of actually developing DM. Now, it's important to remember not every dog with 2 copies will get sick. DM is complicated, but it does show you how widespread this mutation is.
Yeah, makes you wonder about your own dog, doesn't it?
It definitely makes you think. But here's where it gets really interesting. The study found some pretty big differences in mutation frequency between different breeds.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. Spill the beans. Which breeds have the highest prevalence?
The top spot, Pembroke Welsh Corgis. And it wasn't even close. A whopping 55.49% of the corgis tested had at least 1 copy of that C.11GA mutation.
Wow, that's more than half. What about other breeds? Any other surprises?
Oh, definitely. Cavalier King Charles Spaniels were right up there too. 54.17% of them were carriers. Then you've got Scotch Collies at 36.36%, German Shepherds at 29.06%, and Havawarts at 28.38%. So a lot of popular breeds with a significant number of carriers.
It's like a canine genetics puzzle, figuring out why certain breeds are more prone to this mutation.
It really is. But on the other end of the spectrum, Shetland sheepdogs had the lowest frequency, only 6.9%, followed by Australian Shepherds at 7.14%, and Poodles at a tiny 6.32%, so quite a range across the board.
So it's not just about breed. It seems like there's a whole genetic landscape we're just starting to understand.
And that's why this research is so important. It's giving us a clearer picture, and for you, that means more information to make informed decisions about your furry friend.
Right. Like if you're thinking about getting a corgi puppy, this might make you think twice. Or at least be super careful about genetic testing.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power when it comes to our dog's health. But we've only just scratched the surface. There's a whole lot more to unpack from this study, like how old the dogs were when they were tested, and what that tells us about breeding practices. Plus, we need to talk about that tricky concept of incomplete penetrance. Remember I mentioned that earlier.
Oh yeah, that's the part where things get really interesting. But for that, you'll have to wait for part 2 of this deep dive.
Back for more deep dive action into canine degenerative myelopathy. Ready to dig deeper into this Italian dog study?
So yeah, I'm all ears. We were just starting to get into the good stuff before the break.
Right. We were talking about those breeds with high prevalence of the C.11GA mutation, Pembroke Welsh Corgis, and Cavalier King Charles Spaniels especially.
Yeah, those numbers were pretty eye-opening. More than half of the tested dogs in those breeds were carriers. Makes you think.
It really does, and that's where the implications for breeders and puppy owners come in.
Right, because if you know a dog is a carrier, you can make smarter decisions about breeding.
Exactly. The authors of this study, they really hammered home the importance of genetic testing, and not just for dogs showing symptoms, for all potential breeding dogs.
So you're saying even if a dog looks healthy, it could still be carrying this mutation?
Unfortunately, yes. That's why early testing is so important. By identifying carriers, breeders can make informed choices about pairings.
So like a matchmaking service for dogs, but for good genes.
Yeah, something like that. The goal is to minimize the risk of producing puppies with 2 copies of the mutation. Remember, that's when the risk of developing DM really goes up.
It's like trying to solve a genetic puzzle.
It really is. And this research is giving breeders the tools they need to be responsible and hopefully decrease the prevalence of DM in future generations.
And that's a win for everyone. But it's not just on the breeders, is it? Puppy buyers have a role to play here, too.
100%. You have the power to influence breeding practices. Just by asking breeders about the genetic testing status of their dogs, make it clear that genetic health matters to you when you're choosing a puppy.
So like voting with your wallet.
Exactly. Demand drives supply. If more people prioritize healthy genes, more breeders will get on board with testing. It's a collective effort.
Love that. We're all in this together. Breeders, owners, vets, all working towards healthier dogs.
Absolutely. And speaking of vets, this study actually found something interesting about the age at which dogs were tested.
Oh yeah, I remember you mentioned that earlier. Something about homozygous dogs being tested older.
Yeah, they found that dogs with 2 copies of the mutation tended to be older at the time of testing. Makes sense, right? Because by that point, they were probably already showing symptoms.
So it's more of a diagnostic test in those cases, trying to figure out what was wrong.
Right. But what's really interesting is that carriers and clear dogs were often tested much younger, which suggests breeders are taking a proactive approach.
So they're testing even before any symptoms show up. That's great news.
It is. Shows that awareness is growing, especially among breeders of certain breeds, like French Bulldogs, Pembroke Welsh Corgis, Scotch Collies, and Cavalier King Charles Spaniels. A lot of those dogs were tested before they even turned 2.
Wow, that's impressive. Those breeders are really on top of it.
Definitely. But then you have breeds like Australian Shepherds. The average testing age for them was 11.5 years, which makes you think maybe testing in that breed is happening more reactively,
right,
after symptoms have already appeared.
So still some work to do there in terms of raising awareness.
Absolutely. But the more we talk about this, the more we can shift the focus to proactive testing for all breeds.
Right. Early detection is key. And that brings us back to that concept of incomplete penetrance. You mentioned it earlier. Can you remind us what that means?
Sure. Incomplete penetrance basically means not every dog who carries the mutation will actually develop DM, even those with 2 copies.
So it's like they have the genetic predisposition, but it might not actually manifest into the disease.
Exactly. It's complicated. There might be other genetic factors at play, or environmental influences that we don't fully understand yet.
So it's not a guaranteed outcome.
Nope. And that's why it's so important to talk to your vet if your dog tests positive. They can help you interpret the results, take into account your dog's individual situation, breed, age, lifestyle, all that good stuff.
So it's not just about the genes themselves. It's about the whole picture.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And while there's no cure for DM, yet there are things you can do to manage symptoms, improve quality of life, if your dog does develop the disease.
So it's not a death sentence. There's still hope.
Absolutely. And with continued research, maybe one day we'll have even better treatments, or even a way to prevent DM altogether. But for now, we focus on understanding the genetics, making informed decisions, and giving our dogs the best possible care.
I like that. Focus on what we can control.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've been talking a lot about these 2 specific mutations, C111GA and C.52AT. But are there other genetic factors involved in DM, other genes we haven't discovered yet?
That's a great question, and the answer is probably. We've identified some key players, but there's likely a whole lot more to the story, a whole genetic symphony we're just beginning to understand.
So the research continues.
Oh yeah, it's an ongoing detective story, and every new study brings us closer to solving the mystery of DM.
This has been such an incredible deep dive so far. I feel like we've learned so much about the genetics of DM, the importance of testing, and the complexities of incomplete penetrance.
We've covered a lot of ground, but we're not done yet. In the final part of this deep dive, we're going to zoom out a bit, talk about the wider implications of this research, what it means for breeding practices, and the future of certain breeds.
All right, welcome back for the grand finale of our DM deep dive.
The third act, ready to wrap things up.
Ready as I'll ever be. We've been talking about this study in Italy. And all this data about Italian dogs. But does location even matter when it comes to DM?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Do these findings apply to dogs everywhere or just in Italy?
Yeah, like if a breed is high risk in Italy, does that mean it's high risk everywhere?
Well, that's what researchers are trying to figure out. This study is just one piece of the puzzle, a piece of a much bigger global effort to understand DM.
It's like a worldwide genetic detective story.
Exactly. And what they're finding is that the prevalence of these mutations can be quite different depending on where you are in the world.
Really? So a breed might be high risk in one country and low risk in another.
Exactly. Think about it. Different breeds have different origins, right? Different histories. Some breeds might have started in one part of the world and then spread to other places over time.
Through migration or intentional breeding program.
Right. So you could end up with these pockets of the same breed in different parts of the world. But their genes might not be exactly the same.
So like a golden retriever in Italy might be genetically different from a golden retriever in, say, Canada.
That's the idea. And those differences could include the DM mutation. So a breed that's considered high risk in one country might not be as high risk somewhere else.
That's crazy. So it's not just about knowing your dog's breed. It's about understanding the genetic history of that breed in your specific region.
It adds another layer of complexity. But it also highlights why research like this is so important. The more data we collect, the better we'll understand these regional differences.
And that'll help breeders make more informed decisions, right? About testing and pairings.
Exactly. And it'll help puppy buyers, too. You can ask breeders about the genetic history of their dogs, not just their breed standard.
So it's like, do your research, know your dog's roots.
Precisely. And remember, even though genetics plays a big role in DM, it's not the whole story.
Right. We talked about incomplete penetrance. Not every dog with a mutation will get sick.
Exactly. And there might be other factors, too. Environmental factors like diet, exercise, exposure to toxins, things we might be able to control to some extent.
So even if your dog has a genetic predisposition, there might be things you can do to help.
That's the hope. And it's where more research is needed. If we can figure out which lifestyle factors make a difference, we might be able to change the course of DM for some dogs.
That would be incredible.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. We've covered so much today. The genetics, the testing, the regional differences. It's been a wild ride.
And hopefully a valuable one for all you dog lovers out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A huge thank you to all the researchers who are working so hard to understand DM and other canine diseases.
And a big thank you to all of you for joining us on this deep dive.
From Vet Neurojar. Keep those minds inspired, hearts light, and tails wagging.